And I at once bade another demon to be led unto me. And instantly there approached me the demon Asmodeus, bound, and I asked him, Who art thou? But he shot on me a glance of anger and rage, and said, And who art thou? And I said unto him, Thus punished as thou art, answerest thou me? But he with rage said to me, But how shall I answer thee? For thou art a son of man, whereas I was born in angel's seed by a daughter of man, so that no word of our heavenly kind addressed to the earthborn can be overweening. Wherefore also my star is bright in heaven, and men call it, some the Wain, and some the Dragon's Child. I keep near unto this star. So ask me not many things, for thy kingdom also after a little time is to be disrupted, and thy glory is but for a season. And short will be thy tyranny over us, and then we shall again have free range over mankind, so that as they shall revere us as if we were gods, not knowing, men that they are, the names of the angels set over us. Welcome, I am the Succubus Scholar, and today we shall be discussing one of the most prominent of the demon kings, Asmodeus, or Asmodai, or one of the many other variations depending on your preference. Indeed, Asmodai is the prominent name attested to this demon in rabbinical texts, with Asmodeus being used outside of this. As such, in much of the Jewish texts I cite, you will see Asmodeus referred to as Asmodai. Here we shall explore his story through a variety of sources, beginning with his origins, his legendary encounter with King Solomon, and his many antics after. But before all that, let us start with the conflict that is his very name. For as you may have seen in my other videos, names have meaning, and to understand a demon's true name is to have power over it. The common theory with regard to the name Asmodeus is that it is derived from Avestan, an old Iranian language, as Ashmedeva, Ashma meaning wrath and Deva meaning demon, with Ashma being a Zoroastrian demon of wrath. However, it is rather contested, as there are no examples of Ashma being used with this compound, Deva, though many point to the Greek Asmodeus and the Asmodai as evidence that at some point in time it was referenced in this manner. There are those who take exception with citing Asmodai as evidence, however, their argument being that Dai of Asmodai would not derive from Deva, but accepts that Asmodeus may derive from this, with articles of this demon holding very similar characteristics as the demon Ashma. So, if Asmodeus is thought to derive from the demon of wrath in Zoroastrianism, then what of Asmodai? Well, an article by Kohler and Ginsberg believes it to mean the cursed, though I feel this to be a rather weak explanation. Indeed, to me, Asmodai and Asmodeus bear enough similarity to my mind that its change from one to another over the centuries that it passed between cultures seems viable. As with regards to this demon's origins, naturally as always with these myths, there is a conflict, but it is generally agreed that he is the son of one of the 4 queens of the Succubi. One theory is that he was born from the queen Agrat-Bat-Malat via a human mate, King David. One night, David was asleep in the camp in the desert, and in his dream, Agraf coupled with him and bore a dad, identical with Hadad the Edomite. And when they asked him, "What is your name?" he answered, "My name is Ad, Ad is my name." And they called him Asmodai, he is Asmodai, the king of the demons who deprived Solomon of his kingdom. This is intriguing as it makes Asmodeus half-brother to King Solomon. More than this, they identify Hadad the Edomite as being Asmodeus. Hadad is mentioned in the Book of Kings. He fled Edom after King David's nephew and general, Joab, conquered the kingdom. When King David passed away, Hadad would rise up and retake Edom from Solomon. Unsurprisingly, this would cause the Jewish world to demonize Hadad, so claims such as this should be unsurprising. Fitting also that a demon of wrath should be equated to one who would raise an army and seek to reclaim what was taken from him. However, my preference as to Asmodeus' origin lies further back in time, so far that it lies beyond the memory of mankind, slipping from history into mythology. For those of you who've watched my video on Namar, you will know that I'm referring to the antediluvian age, set before the deluge. In that video I already covered what it was like to exist in that time, so I will not go into too much detail here. But one of the most prominent figures of this age was the princess Namar, who would go on to work her enticements to this day as one of the 4 queens. In that age she was no demon queen, but a human, albeit an antediluvian, so longer lived than we are today. When the Grigori, angels charged to watch over Earth, enticed by the beauty of the daughters of man, descended to Earth, Namar would be amongst those most coveted. Famously promiscuous, there would be many accounts of her copulating with them. One of them would be Shamir, from whom she would bear a Nephilim son, none other than Asmodeus. But other sources have it that Namar was the wife of Shamir, the mother of Asmodeus. And it is from here that the demons were born, for her name is indeed found in the writings of the use of demons. Scripture hints and deals briefly with such hidden matters. Unlike Sitra, the pious maiden, Namar, the lovely sister of Tubal-Cain, led the angels astray with her beauty, and from her union with Shamir sprang the devil Asmodeus. If this intrigues you, then I recommend my video on Namar to gain an understanding of this time. This is also supported by the citation at the start of this video, where Asmodeus reveals to Solomon that he was born by angel seed and the daughter of man, this being Shamir and Namar. Just as Namar would survive the deluge and emerge as a queen of the demons, so her son Asmodeus would survive also as king. There are even hints Asmodeus' father survived, with Shamir agreeing to assist Noah with the planting of his vineyard. But some of you might be wondering, if Asmodeus is king, then what does that make Samael? Well, for this we must, as I have in several other videos, turn to the Treaty of the Left Emanation by the Cohen brothers. Even though Asmodeus is called the Great King, he is subservient to Samael. He is called the Great Prince with reference to the emanations above him, and the King of Kings with reference to the emanations underneath him. Asmodeus is governed by him and subservient to him. Samael, the great prince and great king over all the demons, cohabits with the great matron Lilith. Asmodeus, the king of the demons, cohabits with the lesser, younger Lilith. The scholars of this tradition admit to many horrendous details concerning the forms of Samael and Asmodeus, and the images of Lilith, the bride of Samael, and Lilith, the bride of Asmodeus. Happy is he who merits this knowledge. So Asmodeus is a king of the demons, but just as we will see in other modern grimoires, he is not the only king and is ranked below Samael, who presides as king over them all. As I've mentioned before, I also consider the matron Lilith to be the Lilith, and the younger Lilith as Namar. Just my opinion gained through meditations, as there are other sources claiming Lilith is the wife of Asmodeus. Yes, this does mean incest, but with Lilith and Succubus such accounts do often come up. And many sources make claims of Namar partaking of such taboos, such as with her twin brother. But at a glance of what the Cainites got up to during the antediluvian age, such practices would be the least of their sins. Plus, as demonic creatures of lust, morality holds a different meaning to them than it does to us. Indeed, as the embodiments of rampant lust, their vices and desires often lead to internal conflict, as the treaty goes on to state, citing the mysterious text, the chapters of the Lesser Palaces. Samael, the great prince of them all, grew exceedingly jealous of Asmodeus, the king of the demons, because of this Lilith, who is called Lilith the Maiden, the Young. She is in the form of a beautiful woman from her head to her waist, but from her waist down she is burning like fire, like mother, like daughter. This treaty also mentions that the younger Lilith and Asmodeus bear a son, who is titled the Sword of Asmodeus, one of his names being Alapanash. It also mentions briefly that Asmodeus maintains his power over his subjects through terror, adding to his wrathful aspect and showing his tyrannical manner of ruling. But perhaps the most renowned and famous account of Asmodeus is his exploits during the reign of King Solomon, a golden age in Jewish mythology, a time of terror for the Lilin, with even Lilith and Mahalath holding a temporary truce on their war whilst they contended with this powerful figure enslaving their kind. King Solomon would use the power of his ring gifted to him from the angel Michael, to trap and bend demons to his will. Specifically, he would use them for the building of his temple in Jerusalem. However, he would encounter a conundrum. The architects were having difficulty fitting the stone to his precise specifications. More than that, the Talmud forbade the use of iron for erecting the altar. These same architects would recommend a mysterious creature known as the Shamir, a worm that could cut through stone as hard as diamond. Supposedly used by Moses in engraving the Hoshen, the location of the Shamir had since been lost. According to the Gittin, Solomon would bring forth a male and female demon and torment them to reveal its whereabouts. It became clear they simply did not know, however, but they did know one who might: Asmodeus, king of the demons. Solomon said to them, "Where is Asmodeus?" They said to him, "He is on such and such a mountain. He has dug a pit for himself there and filled it with water and covered it with a rock and sealed it with his seal. And every day he ascends to heaven and studies in the heavenly study hall, and he descends to the earth and studies in the earthly study hall. And he comes back and checks his seal to ensure that nobody has entered his pit, and then he uncovers it and drinks it from the water in the pit, and then he covers it and seals it again and goes." Learning this, Solomon would send the commander of his army, Benaiah, to bring Asmodeus to him. Benaiah would seize Asmodeus by first draining his well of water and filling it instead with wine before hiding. When Asmodeus returns, he realises it is wine, and acts surprisingly virtuous for a demon, refusing to drink that which brings about harlotry and foolishness, until his thirst gets the better of him, and he eventually partakes, becoming drunk and falling asleep. Seeing this, Benaiah emerged and bound Asmodeus in a chain with the name of God engraved upon it, fully securing him. With this done, he would take the bound Demon King back to Jerusalem with him. And what an eventful and perplexing journey the demon would make it for the commander. He would rub against a palm tree until it fell, then again to a house. When a widow emerges from another house, begging he does not do the same, he leans away until he breaks a bone, stating that it's the power of soft words. He would then guide a blind man to the correct road and do the same for a drunken one. He would witness a wedding and cry, then laugh at a man asking a shoemaker for shoes that will last 7 years, then laugh again at a sorcerer showing his tricks. When Benaiah asked the meaning of all this, Asmodeus would explain, in heaven the blind man is considered highly, and to help him would grant him favour. The drunk man, however, was considered wicked, so he helped him, so that all his reward would be on the material plane, and none would be granted him in the afterlife. As for the wedding, he cried for the groom, for he would die in 30 days. He laughed at the shoemaker's customer, for he had not 7 days to live, let alone shoes that would last 7 years. He laughed also at the sorcerer, for Asmodeus knew a great treasure was in the earth below him, yet his supposed powers saw it not. Here we are given a glimpse at Asmodeus' divination powers, an attribute linked to demons with some texts, saying demons can grant the powers of foresight to the summoners. Indeed, some refer to his mother Namar as the mother of divination. When they arrive at Jerusalem, Asmodeus would be kept waiting for 3 days before being granted an audience. After some back and forth, he would reveal the Shamir to be owned by the Angel of the Seas, who would lend it to a hen, who would use it to split mountains before filling it with seeds, making it habitable for her young. Solomon would send a servant who would lay glass over the hen's nest. When the hen could not reach her young, it fetched the Shamir to break through the glass, at which point the servant attained the worm and brought it to the king. Sadly, the hen would hang itself, rather than face the wrath of the Angel of the Sea. Even when the temple was completed with this, Solomon kept Asmodeus bound. Bound or not, Asmodeus would continue his antics. In some legends there are 6 worlds beneath our own one, with one of these being known as Tevel, where the sun rises in the west and sets in the east. Its denizens rarely peaceful. Asmodeus would present one of these to Solomon. Asmodeus, the king of the demons, once said to Solomon, "Thou art the wisest of men, yet I shall show thee something thou hast never seen." Thereupon Asmodeus stuck his finger in the ground, and up came a double-headed man. He was one of the Canaanites, who lived underground, and are altogether different in nature and habit from the denizens of the upper world. When the Canaanite wanted to descend to his dwelling place again, it appeared that he could not return thither. Not even Asmodeus could bring this thing about. So he remained on earth, took unto himself a wife, and begot 7 sons, one of whom resembled his father in having 2 heads. It would become clear Asmodeus did this to test Solomon, for the son with 2 heads would demand double the inheritance, claiming he is 2 people. After some thought, Solomon would pour boiling water on one head, causing both heads to scream and admit they are not 2 but 1 being. Eventually, however, Asmodeus' opportunity would arise, and he would seize it utterly. One day, he stood with Asmodai alone. He said to Asmodai, "It is written, for him like the lofty horns of the wild ox." And the sages say in explanation of the verse, "Like the lofty horns, these are the ministering angels. The wild ox, these are the demons." In what way are you greater than us? Why does the verse praise your abilities and powers over those of human beings? Asmodai said to him, "Take the chain engraved with God's name off me, and give me your ring with God's name engraved upon it, and I will show you my strength." Solomon took the chain off him, and he gave him his ring. Asmodai swallowed the ring, and grew until he placed 1 wing in the heaven, and 1 wing on the earth. He threw Solomon a distance of 400 parasangs. With regard to that moment, Solomon said, "What profit is there for a person through all of his toil under the sun?" With Solomon deposed from the throne, Asmodai took his place. You might be thinking, how can the wise King Solomon be so foolish? But I would pose to you that the greatest of friends can also be the greatest of enemies. Asmodeus likely gained his trust over time before betraying him. However, there is an alternative in Islamic mythology. He had a chief concubine named Al-Amina, to whom, when he entered his privy or when he wished to have intercourse with one of his wives, he would give his signet ring until he purified himself, because he would not touch his signet ring unless he was ritually pure. His dominion was in his signet, and one day he gave it to her as he used to do. Then he entered his privy. The devil, who was master of the sea, who was named Saka, came to her in Solomon's form. Amina saw nothing unlike Solomon in him. And when he said, "My signet ring, O Amina," she gave it to him. He put it on his hand, went out, sat on Solomon's throne, and the birds, jinns, and men surrounded him. Solomon came out and went to Al-Amina, but his condition and appearance had changed for everyone who saw him. When he said, "Oh, Amina, my signet ring," she replied, "And who are you?" And he said, "I am Solomon David." She said, "You lie, you are not Solomon David. Solomon came and took his signet ring. He is that one sitting on his throne in this dominion." Oh, and quick note, in Islamic mythology, Asmodeus is often referred to as Saka, which I will explain later on. From this point on, none believe Solomon is Solomon, and he is chased out of his kingdom. For 3 years, Solomon would wander as a beggar, sharing food with old acquaintances, before taking a position in the royal household of Ammon as a cook, his culinary skills raising him to become head chef. During this time, Asmodeus, posing as King Solomon, would begin to arouse the suspicion of the Sanhedrin, his council. With his change in behaviour, Benaiah, once his closest confidant, would reveal to them that he had not sought his counsel in a long time, his king's public commands being questionable. The Sanhedrin would then call forth the queens, Solomon's harem, to see if he had sought their company. Here, Asmodeus' demonic traits as a demon of lust would become prevalent, for they would say that he would have them do perverse acts, such as insisting on sleeping with them during their menstruation. More than that, he began to seek a sexual relationship with his mother, Bathsheba. They asked if they ever saw his feet, for if he had the feet of a cockerel, they would know it is a demon. But they said he always kept his socks on. As for the ring that held him and his demon people in check, he cast it into the sea. Meanwhile, the real Solomon in Ammon would fall in love with the princess Namar, not the demoness, a love that was requited. When the king found out, he left them both in the desert to die. Desperate, they managed to obtain a fish to stave off their hunger. And what should they find within it but Solomon's magical ring? At once, Solomon uses it to transport himself to the throne and confront Asmodeus. Upon seeing him with his power fully returned, Asmodeus fled, never to return or be seen by Solomon again, at least in Hebrew literature. In Islamic, Saka means rock, a title Asmodeus earned by his punishment from Solomon. who bore a hole into a rock, sealed him within it, bound it with iron and lead, and then cast it into the sea. However, returning to the Hebrew version, it would be said Solomon was never the same after seeing Asmodeus in his true form. The Gemara adds, and even so, although Asmodeus fled, Solomon was fearful of him, and this as it is written, "Behold the bed of Solomon, surrounded by 60 strong men from the warriors of Israel, all of them holding swords and trained in war, each man with his sword on his thigh, from fear in the nights." So that is the legend of Solomon's encounter with Asmodeus. Naturally, Asmodeus would appear in the Lesser Key of Solomon, a magical grimoire supposedly penned by King Solomon, describing as to how he bound the various entities, though more likely from the 17th or 18th century. Here we are given a means to summon Asmodeus using his seal. He can instruct the practitioner in arithmetic, astronomy, and geometry, as well as locate treasure and make one appear invisible. We are also given a rather nightmarish description of his features that also matches that given in Plancy's Dictionnaire Infernal. He appeareth with 3 heads, whereof the first is like a bull, the second like a man, and the third like a ram. He hath also the tail of a serpent, and from his mouth issue flames of fire. His feet are webbed like those of a goose. He sitteth upon an infernal dragon, and beareth in his hand a lance with a banner. This would not be the last time Asmodeus would pester the world, however. After Solomon, the next most famous text featuring this demon king would be the Book of Tobit, where Asmodeus' lustful and wrathful traits are once again put to the fore. Tobias' father Toby has an unfortunate start. After burying one of his slain brethren, a bird defecates into his eyes, blinding him for 4 years. During this time he would hear the bleating of a kid and accuse his wife of stealing it, launching into an argument. Depressed by his affliction, he would pray to God for salvation or death. Meanwhile, Sarah was suffering with her own misfortune. And on that same day, it happened to Sarah, the daughter of Reuel, who lived at Ecbatana, a city in the land of Media, that her father's maidservants were approaching her and mocking her, saying to her, "It is not meet to call thee Sarah, but Zara, trouble, for she had been given to wife to 7 husbands, and not one of them had approached her. But Asmodeus, the king of the demons, had killed them before they approached her, after the way of all the earth." And the maid said to her, "Why dost thou kill thine husbands, and beat us because of this evil matter? It would be good for thy parents that thou shouldest die for them, and that they see not of thee either son or daughter forever." Sarah would also pray for deliverance or death. Both prayers would be heard, and the angel of healing, Raphael, would be sent to their aid. Tobias would be sent by his father to Media on a business matter, and would find a stranger, none other than Raphael, who is willing to be his guide. On the way, they catch a fish in the river Tigris, where Raphael instructs him to remove the heart and gall. And he said to him, "The heart is good to smoke thereof before a man in whom is an evil spirit, or the spirit of demons, and it will flee from him. And the gall is good for anointing therewith the eyes in which is whiteness, and they will be healed." On the way, they stay at the house of Reuel, where the angel advises Tobias to request his daughter Sarah in marriage. Reuel shows some consternation and admits that she has already lost 7 husbands, but Tobias convinces him to proceed nonetheless. And it came to pass, when they had finished preparing the chamber and the bed, that Tobiah and Sarah arose and went to their chamber. And Tobiah remembered the words of Raphael, and took the heart of the fish, and put it upon the pan, and smoked under Sarah's garments. And Asmodeus received the smell, and went out thereat, and fled to the end of the land of Egypt. And the angel, Raphael, bound him there. And he went out of the chamber, and they shut the door on them twain. Reuel, who had already prepared a grave during the night for Tobias, is overjoyed to find him still alive the next morning. Laden with riches from the dowry, Tobias would return and apply the fish gall to his father's eyes, curing his blindness. When Tobias seeks to give his guide his wages, the stranger reveals himself as Raphael, and asks they sing praise to the Lord instead as payment before taking his leave. So here we see Asmodeus in his more malevolent incubus form, jealously keeping any man from claiming Sarah until he is driven away by the scent of burning fish guts. Even seen as the land of sorcerers in Jewish mythology, he seeks shelter in Egypt, but is instead bound there by Raphael. This aligns with the Testament of Solomon, where Asmodeus is forced to reveal to Solomon his fear of water and a species of fish that is used to avert him. And I adjured him by the name of the Lord Sabaoth, saying, Fear God, Asmodeus, and tell me by what angel thou art frustrated. But he said, By Raphael, the archangel that stands before the throne of God. But the liver and gall of a fish put me to flight, when smoked over ashes of the tamarisk. I again asked him and said, Hide not aught from me, for I am Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Tell me the name of the fish which thou reverest. And he answered, It is the glanus by name, and is found in the rivers of Assyria, wherefore it is that I roam about in those parts. I have seen it argued in some texts that Asmodeus was but fulfilling his role as a protector of maidens, saving them for their intended grooms as decreed from on high, Sarah being one such instance. Personally, I find this hard to believe, as, if true, killing the previous 7 suitors to save her for Tobias seems a tad extreme. Indeed, to me, it is true to his incubus nature to jealously guard his chosen victim for himself, endangering anyone else who comes near. A common occurrence to those who are with succubi-incubi partners, unwillingly or not. Of course, Asmodeus would make an appearance in Kramer's Malleus Maleficarum, a staple of any witch hunter's library. Despite its gross inaccuracies and deluded opinions, here Asmodeus is not unlike the description found within Plancy's Dictionary and Fern. But the very devil of fornication and the chief of that abomination is called Asmodeus, which means the creature of judgment. For because of this kind of sin, a terrible judgment was executed upon Sodom and the 4 other cities. Here again, Asmodeus is focused upon for his lustful nature, as opposed to his wrath. I do find it intriguing, though, that Kramer translates the name of Asmodeus as meaning the creature of judgment, and perhaps unintentionally does seem to show some insight into his position on the cliff of the Tree of Shadows. The sphere commonly attributed as Asmodeus' domain in the Shadow Realm is the Shadow of Gavura, Golachab, the Sphere of Judgment. No small position, for in some Kabbalistic texts it is the origin of all demons, including Lilith and Samael, brought about when the emanation overflowed and shattered the world, creating husks that look akin to 4 spheres overlaying one another, like an onion. If true, then to rule over there is to rule over the origin of all demons, no small fate. It also fits again with his wrathful aspect though, for Golachab is the sphere of judgment imbalanced, occupied by fiery and volatile demons, as well as Lilu and Lilitu. Mortals influenced by this sphere can bring severe radicalism or tyranny, not unlike the witch hunts Kramer encouraged, destroying many in their quest of deluded righteousness. Finally, I would finish on a brief mention of the Loudun possessions from the 1600s, an incident in France where a convent of Ursuline nuns claimed they were possessed by demons, experiencing visions, hearing whispers at night, and finding themselves uncontrollably contorting into strange positions. When the confessors held the exorcisms publicly on a nigh daily basis, it became quite the tourist attraction. Eventually, physicians would be sent to inspect the nuns and bear witness to one of the confessors performing the exorcisms, an event that would be rather humiliating for the convent. Indeed, when one of the confessors, Father Pierre Bar, performed said ritual on the prioress Jeanne de Andreas, the physicians would burst out laughing at the prioress's poor attempt at Latin. It would be during this pitiful spectacle that prioress would claim to be possessed of 6 demons, chief amongst them being Asmodeus. Oh, your reverence, what very poor Latin. Bar pretended not to hear, and next asked what was the name of the demon who had taken possession of her. The poor superior, who was greatly confused by the unexpected effect of her last 2 answers, could not speak for a long time. But at length, with great trouble, she brought out the name Asmodee, without daring to Latinize it. The exorcist then inquired how many devils the superior had in her body, and to this question she replied quite fluently, 6. The bailiff upon this requested Bar to ask the chief devil how many evil spirits he had with him, but the need for this answer had been foreseen, and the nun unhesitatingly returned, Quinque. This answer raised Asmodeus somewhat in the opinion of those present, but when the bailiff adjured the superior to repeat in Greek what she had just said in Latin, she made no reply, and on the adjuration being renewed, she immediately recovered her senses. Clearly, at this stage, they were not taken very seriously. However, when the nuns accused the local priest Urbing Grandier as being the sorcerer who had sent the demons to plague them, they were suddenly taken very seriously. Grandier was renowned for his womanizing and opposition to the cardinal. With such powerful enemies, authorities quickly exploited the opportunity, held a farce of a trial and had Grandier burned at the stake, despite the nuns attempting to recant their statements when they saw how out of hand their statements were getting. I am so very tempted to continue on, listener. There are other stories involving Asmodeus and those linked to him, such as a man who married a daughter of Asmodeus, only to be killed by her kiss when he tried to divorce her. There is the groom who had to stare down Asmodeus to win back his bride, after Lilith lured her away with a beautiful dress. There is also the famous tale of Joseph de la Reina, who sought to bring about the coming of the Messiah by imprisoning Asmodeus and Lilith on Mount Zia. Perhaps I will do a part 2 to cover these. My main goal here was to cover the most renowned tales concerning Asmodeus to yourselves, particularly with regards to the Solomon accounts. There are many differing sources, so hopefully I managed to collate together in a manner that is easy for you to digest, or at least be entertained by. I suppose my concluding thoughts on Asmodeus would be what the source of his wrath is. Possibly once an antediluvian, to then become the king of a husk of a world filled with terrible beings, possibly unfinished beings left over from creation if Islamic sources are to be believed, and given a taste of a potential golden kingdom when masquerading as Solomon. I feel Asmodeus likely shares Lilith, and in my opinion, his wife and mother Namar's goal of bringing forth a race of superior beings, superior to those descended from Adam and Eve, aka us. Until then, he must make do with his lot and maintain power through his tyrannical methods. However, it is often stated, Asmodeus included, that demons have the ability to divine the future. Asmodeus' ability at this is shown on his journey to Solomon, so I cannot help but wonder, is the source of his wrath at his impatience to achieve this goal and rule over a splendid kingdom? Perhaps, but I cannot help but wonder what tomorrows he may have seen that he should remain in such a state of fury. Thank you so much for listening. Again, I hope I managed to pull together all these sources in a manner that has been entertaining for you, as well as been a means to give you an understanding of the possible motivations and the traits of this incredibly important and high-ranking figure in the realm of the Lilin. I would also like to give thanks to those of you who have provided me support, as well as some of the incredibly helpful feedback and comments. Although a rather small channel, the few comments have really spurred me on, as well as helped broaden my understanding of this incredible realm. I certainly do not consider myself the be-all and end-all of Succubus knowledge, and I'm still discovering new things every time I delve into it, as well as from yourselves. As I said before, my main goal is to provide the information that so few books seem to bother researching or relaying. Not only to broadcast this to a wide audience, but to better preserve this knowledge that I feel could so easily be lost to either time, or be drowned out like the antediluvians in the flood of lukewarm attempts at scholarly texts on Lilith and her king. But that's enough prattling from me. Again, thank you all so much, and may Lilith grant you pleasant dreams.